The sun was setting over the quiet lawns of Rashtrapati Bhavan, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The air was still, except for the soft sound of footsteps on the gravel path. Sundar Pichai walked slowly, his eyes scanning the garden. Ahead, he had been invited for a special evening meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but there was something unusual about today. Modi had also asked Lakshmi Pichai, Sundar's mother, to join them. Sundar could not understand why. Lakshmi was a simple woman who had lived most of her life away from politics and fame. She preferred the comfort of her modest home in Chennai over grand official spaces. She rarely traveled, and she had never been in the same room with the Prime Minister before. Sundar knew his mother was nervous, but she tried to hide it with a calm smile. As they entered the wide veranda, Modi stood waiting, wearing his familiar half-sleeved kurta. He greeted Sundar warmly, but when his eyes shifted to Lakshmi, something changed in his expression. It was softer, more personal. He walked forward, folded his hands, and said, "Namaste, Amma." Lakshmi smiled shyly and returned the greeting. The three of them moved inside. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood, and the evening light poured in through tall windows. Tea was served, but Sundar noticed that Modi seemed more interested in talking to Lakshmi than in formal discussions. He asked her about her childhood, about her struggles raising a family, about the values she had taught her children. Lakshmi spoke in a quiet, thoughtful voice. She shared small stories about Sundar as a boy, like how he would sit under a street lamp to study when there was no electricity at home, and how he once cried when he couldn't afford a book he wanted. Modi listened closely, his eyes not leaving her face. Sundar, sitting to the side, felt a strange mix of emotions. He was proud to see his mother's words respected so deeply, but he was also curious. Why had Modi called them here? What was he looking for in these stories? At one point, Modi leaned back in his chair and said, "Amma, you have raised a son who has changed the world in many ways. But the way you speak shows me that you have not let success touch your heart in the wrong way." Lakshmi simply replied, "Life teaches you that we are all the same at the end." There was a brief silence after that. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Sundar noticed a faint smile forming on Modi's lips, and then, unexpectedly, Lakshmi said something in Tamil. Sundar could see the Prime Minister trying to guess what she meant. When Sundar translated it, Modi suddenly laughed, a warm, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise even him. Lakshmi joined in, and for a moment, the room felt lighter, as if all formality had vanished. But just as the laughter faded, Modi's face grew serious again. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Amma," he said slowly, "there is something I wish to ask you, something important." His voice carried a weight that made Sundar sit straighter in his chair. Lakshmi looked at him with calm eyes. "What is it?" she asked. Modi paused for a moment before answering as, if carefully choosing his words, "I want to know the one lesson you would give me, as if I were your own son." The question hung in the air. Sundar felt his chest tighten. He knew his mother had taught him countless lessons over the years, but to be asked this by the Prime Minister of India was different. Lakshmi sat in silence for a moment, her hands folded on her lap. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the evening light was fading into dusk. Finally, she turned back and spoke. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her eyes, a depth that only came from years of living, struggling, and understanding life. What she said next would not only leave Modi quiet for a long time, but would also mark the beginning of something Sundar never expected to witness. Lakshmi took a slow breath before she answered Modi's question. Sundar noticed the way her hands rested calmly on the table, as if she had been preparing for this moment all her life without even knowing it. "Never let power make you forget kindness," she said quietly, "because the day you stop feeling for others, you stop being a leader. You may still hold the position, but you will lose the people." Her words were soft, but they landed with the weight of truth. Modi did not respond immediately. He kept his gaze on her, as if he were searching for more in her face than the sentence she had just spoken. Sundar could feel the quiet tension in the room. It was not the tense silence of disagreement, but the stillness that follows when something deeply important has been said. Finally, Modi smiled faintly. Those words are not just advice. For me, they are a mirror I must look into every day. Lakshmi nodded, but she did not praise him for saying that. Instead, she added, "It is easy to be kind to those who praise you, but true kindness shows in how you treat the ones who have nothing to give you." Sundar felt a shiver run through him. He had heard his mother say things like this before, but hearing her speak them to one of the most powerful men in the country was something else. He glanced at Modi and was surprised to see a shadow of thought pass over his face, as though some old memory had been stirred. Modi began, his tone softer now. "There was a time, many years ago, when I was traveling alone through a village. It was raining heavily, and I had no place to stay. A woman I had never met invited me into her small hut and gave me food she could barely afford to share. I still remember her face, though I never saw her again. Tonight, speaking to you, I feel the same warmth I felt that day." Lakshmi gave a small smile. "Then you already know the value of kindness. You only need to protect it from the noise of the world." At that moment, a servant entered quietly to refill the teacups. The sound of pouring tea was the only thing breaking the stillness. Sundar noticed that Modi seemed reluctant to let this conversation drift into small talk. Instead, he turned to Sundar for the first time since they had sat down. "Sundar," Modi said, "you have achieved much in life. You have technology at your fingertips and resources most people can only dream of. But tell me, do you still remember the days when you had nothing?" The question caught Sundar off guard. He felt his throat tighten before he answered. "Yes, sir, I remember everything. The days without electricity, the nights when we wondered if there would be enough food, the small victories that felt like miracles. I remember all of it." Modi nodded slowly. "Good, because forgetting those days would be the first step toward losing yourself." Lakshmi looked at her son with quiet pride, but there was something else in her eyes, a certain worry, as if she knew that the world Sundar now lived in could easily pull him away from the values she had built in him. The conversation could have ended there, but instead, Modi leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. He said to Lakshmi, "There is one more thing I must tell you. Today is not just about meeting you. I have a reason, and it concerns your son." Sundar's heart began to beat faster. "Sir, what do you mean?" he asked. Modi looked from Lakshmi to Sundar and back again. "There is a challenge coming, one that will test not just his skill, but his heart. And before it happens, I wanted him to hear from you what truly matters." Lakshmi's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "What kind of challenge?" Modi did not answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked to the tall window, looking out at the darkening sky. "It is something I cannot speak about openly yet," he said, his voice low. "But when the time comes, both of you will understand. Until then, Sundar must remember what you have taught him today, because it may be the only thing that keeps him on the right path." The words left an uneasy feeling in the room. Sundar felt as though a shadow had just entered their evening, and he could not shake the thought that whatever was coming would change more than just his work. It might change his life. 2 weeks had passed since that evening at Rashtrapati Bhavan, but Sundar could not get Modi's words out of his head. Every day, between meetings and emails, his mind drifted back to that moment when the Prime Minister had stood by the window, speaking of a challenge that would test his heart. Sundar tried to tell himself it was nothing urgent, but deep inside, he knew it was only a matter of time before something happened. Lakshmi, on the other hand, had returned to her quiet life. In She cooked, she watered the plants, she greeted neighbors with the same gentle smile. But even she felt a certain weight in her chest, a sense that her son's life was about to face something big, something she could not protect him from. One evening, while Sundar was in his office at Google headquarters, he received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end was low and urgent. "Mr. Pichai, this is Arjun Mehta from Delhi. I am calling on behalf of the Prime Minister. We need you to come to India immediately. It is a matter of national importance." Sundar straightened in his chair. "What is this about?" he asked. "I cannot discuss it on the phone," the voice replied, "but it is connected to what the Prime Minister told you during your last meeting. Please book a flight tonight." Within hours, Sundar was on his way back to India. His mind was racing the entire journey. He thought about his work deadlines, about his team waiting for him, but none of it seemed to matter now. The mystery of Modi's words and the urgency of this call had pushed everything else aside. When he landed in Delhi, a black car was waiting for him. The driver said nothing during the ride, but Sundar noticed they were not heading toward the usual government buildings. Instead, they drove through quieter streets until they reached a modest guest house with no visible security. Inside, Modi was waiting. He stood as Sundar entered, his face serious but calm. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said. Double quotes. "Sir, what is happening?" Sundar asked. Modi motioned for him to sit. "There is a project, one that could change the future of millions. It is about technology, but it is also about trust. The people who will be affected by this project are some of the poorest in our country, people who have been left out of progress for decades. They have little reason to believe in promises from leaders or corporations." Sundar leaned forward. "And you want me to lead this?" "Yes," Modi said. "But it is not just about leading. It is about winning their trust. If you approach this like a business deal, you will fail. If you approach it like a man who still remembers the nights without electricity, you might succeed." The weight of the request hit Sundar. He understood technology. He understood global business. But this was different. This was about people who might see him as just another powerful outsider. Before he could respond, the door opened and a woman entered. She was wearing a simple cotton sari, her hair tied back, her face lined with years of hard work. Modi introduced her as Kamala, a community leader from a small village in Tamil. Nadu. Kamala looked straight at Sundar. "Sir, I am not here to praise you," she said. "I am here because my people are tired of promises. If you want us to believe in you, must come to us, live with us, and see how we live. Only then will we listen." The challenge was clear now. It was not about a speech or a contract. It was about stepping into a world far from boardrooms and conferences, and proving through actions, not words, that he understood. Sundar sat back, his mind spinning. He thought of his mother's words, of Modi's warning, and of the quiet days of his own childhood. He knew he could say no. It would be easy to walk away, to tell himself he was too busy. But something deep inside told him this was exactly the challenge Modi had spoken of, the test that would reveal whether he had truly held on to the values his mother had given him. 2 days later, Sundar found himself on a narrow, dusty road in rural Tamil Nadu. The air was heavy with heat, and the smell of earth and wood smoke drifted through the air. His car slowed as they entered the village, a cluster of small huts, some made of brick, others of mud and thatch. Goats wandered freely, children ran barefoot along the paths, and women carried pots of water on their heads. Kamala walked beside him, her steps steady. "Welcome to my home," she said simply. "This is where your project will live or die." The villagers noticed him immediately. Some stopped their work to stare, others whispered among themselves. A few older men frowned, their faces holding years of mistrust. Sundar could feel the weight of their eyes on him. In the cities, he was greeted with respect and recognition. Here, he was just another stranger who might make promises and then disappear. He was taken to a small, open area under a large banyan tree. A group of villagers had gathered. They sat on mats, waiting for him to speak. Sundar hesitated. He had given countless speeches in boardrooms and universities, but this was different. These people did not care about his titles or the size of his company. They wanted to know if he was here for them or for himself. He began slowly. I was born in India, just like you. I grew up in a small home. There were days without electricity, nights when we had to study by candlelight. I have not forgotten where I came from. Some of the villagers looked at each other but said nothing. Kaima stepped forward. He says he remembers, but we will see if he understands. The first challenge came almost immediately. An old man with a weathered face stood up. Sir, he said, we have heard promises before. They said they would bring electricity. They said they would bring clean water. We waited, and nothing came. Why should we believe you will be different? Sundar felt the sting of the question. There was no quick answer, no clever line that would change the man's mind. You should not believe me because of my words, he said. You should believe me only if my actions earn it. The man studied him for a moment, then sat down without a word. That night, Sundar stayed in a small hut on the edge of the village. There was no air conditioning, no hot water, and the only light came from a single kerosene lamp. He lay awake, listening to the distant sound of crickets. He thought about his comfortable home in California, about the smooth glass of his office windows, about how far he was from all of it now. Part of him wondered if he had made a mistake. This was not his world anymore. Could he really fit into it again? Could he really win over people who had every reason to doubt him? Early the next morning, before the sun rose, he heard movement outside. When he stepped out, he saw a group of children walking toward the river with empty containers. Without thinking, he joined them. The walk was long, and the ground was rough under his feet. When they reached the river, he saw women bending to fill pots, balancing them on their heads for the journey back. By the time they returned to the village, sweat was dripping down his face. One of the boys, no older than 10, looked up at him and said, "You walk slow, uncle." The boy smiled shyly, and for the first time since arriving, Sundar smiled back. Kaima, ALA, who had been watching from a distance, walked over. "They noticed you went with them," she said. "You did not have to, but you did. Maybe you understand more than I thought." But she quickly added, "This is only the beginning. Tomorrow, we will take you to the place that will decide everything." The next morning, the sun was just rising when Kamala called for Sundar. The air was cool, but there was an energy in the village. People were moving quickly, as if something important was about to happen. Kamala led him through winding paths, until they reached the edge of the village, where the land sloped down toward a dry, cracked riverbed. "This is the deciding place," Kamala said, pointing to the empty stretch of earth. "Our river. It used to flow all year. Now, it is dry for most of the months. Without water, our crops fail. Without crops, we have nothing. We have been asking for help for years, but no one has done anything. If you can solve this, we will believe you." Sundar crouched down, running his fingers over the cracked ground. The soil was warm and lifeless. He knew this was not a problem technology alone could solve. It needed planning, resources, and trust between people who had been failed too many times. An elderly woman stepped forward from the group of villagers watching. Her face was lined like the riverbed itself. "My husband died waiting for the water to return," she said, her voice trembling. "Every year they tell us it will come back. Every year we bury another farmer." Sundar felt a deep ache in his chest. He thought of his own father, of the quiet evenings when they would sit together on their small porch in Chennai. If his father had faced this kind of loss, How would their family have survived? Kamala broke the silence. There is a way. We have a plan, but we need money and people who will not steal it. Will you give us that? Before Sundar could answer, a sharp voice came from the crowd. Why should he? He will go back to his big office in America and forget we even exist. It was the same old man who had questioned him on the first day. His words hit hard, but Sundar did not look away. Instead, he stepped forward, closer to the crowd. You? All right, he said. I could leave. I could go back to my office and never return. But if I did that, I would be turning my back on everything my mother taught me. I am here because I want to be, not because I have to be, and I will stay until this river flows again. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some were still doubtful, but others looked at him differently now. Later that day, Sundar sat with Kamala under the shade of the banyan tree, going over the details of the plan. They talked about digging new wells, setting up water storage systems, and finding engineers who could design a long-term solution. Sundar promised to fund the project personally if it meant cutting through the layers of bureaucracy that had slowed progress for years. As the meeting ended, a group of children came running up to him. One little girl held out a small clay pot, no bigger than his hand. "This is for you," she said shyly. "It is empty now. When the water comes back, we will fill it and give it to you again." Sundar took the pot gently, his throat tightening. It was more than just a gift. It was a promise and a test. That night, he sat outside his hut, looking at the stars. The clay pot rested beside him. He thought about Modi's words, his mother's advice, and the faces of the villagers. He realized that this was not just about water or technology. It was about proving that promises could still mean something. The next morning, as he prepared to leave for Chennai to begin work on the plan, Kamala walked up to him. "I believe you will try," she said. "But whether you succeed, that is something only time will tell." Months passed. Sundar split his time between California and Tamil Nadu, flying back and forth to oversee the water project. It was harder than he had imagined. Machines broke down, shipments were delayed, and more than once, dishonest contractors tried to take advantage of the funds. But each time a problem arose, Sundar returned to the village and faced it directly. He walked the fields with the farmers, listened to their worries, and made sure every decision was transparent. Slowly, the trust he had been fighting for began to grow. Then, one hot afternoon, as he stood by the dry riverbed, the first signs of change appeared. A thin stream of water began to snake its way across the cracked ground. Children ran alongside it, laughing and shouting. Women began filling pots, their smiles wide and bright. The old man who had doubted him the most stood silently for a moment, then walked over and placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder. "You did not leave," he said simply, "and you kept your word." It was a victory, but Sundar knew it was not his alone. It belonged to everyone who had worked beside him, and to the people who had refused to give up. A few weeks later, Sundar returned to Delhi to meet Modi and give his final report. Modi listened carefully as Sundar described the work, the setbacks, and the final success. When Sundar finished, Modi leaned back and smiled. "I knew you would do it," he said, "but I wanted you to find out for yourself why it mattered." Then, Modi glanced toward the door. "There's someone here who wanted to see you." Lakshmi walked in, wearing her simple sari and carrying a small bag. Sundar was surprised. "Amma, what are you doing here?" Modi answered for her. "I invited her. I thought it was only right she heard the ending to this story in person." Lakshmi listened quietly as Sundar told her about the village, the doubts, and the day the water returned. Her eyes grew moist, but she kept her smile. When he finished, she turned to Modi. "Sir, you were right to send him. I think he finally understands what I meant the night we met." Modi nodded. "He does, and so do I." There was a pause, and then Lakshmi added, "But you know, when you first told him about a challenge, He looked so worried. I could see it in his face. I thought to myself, this man may be Prime Minister, but he is just like any mother's son when he gets nervous. Modi laughed, a full, genuine laugh that filled the room. Amma, if you tell people that, they will think I am soft. Lakshmi leaned forward, her eyes playful. Maybe you should let them think that. Softness is not weakness. Sometimes it is strength. The laughter between them grew, light and warm, as if all titles and positions had been set aside for a moment. Sundar watched them, feeling something he could not quite describe: pride, relief, and a deep sense of connection. When the laughter finally faded, Modi stood and said, Amma, I hope you will keep giving me advice like that. Leaders need mothers like you to remind us who we are. Lakshmi smiled, and sons need reminders too. I will make sure he remembers. The three of them walked out together into the soft evening light. Somewhere in the distance, the call of a train echoed through the city. Sundar thought of the clay pot in his home, now filled with the river water the villagers had sent him as a gift. It was proof that promises could be kept, and that kindness could turn strangers into family. Weeks after that meeting in Delhi, Sundar returned to the village once more, not for work, not for meetings, but simply to see the people who had changed his life. He arrived without notice, walking along the familiar dusty road. The village looked different now. The fields were green again, women were washing clothes in flowing water, and children were splashing each other near the river. The air was full of life. Kamala spotted him first. You came back, she said with a smile. I told you I would, Sundar replied. The old man who had doubted him walked over, carrying a clay pot, the same one the little girl had given him months ago. It was full of fresh river water. It is time we give this back to you, he said. Sundar took the pot carefully, feeling its weight in his hands. This is not mine, he said. This belongs to all of you. I will keep it, but it will remind me every day of this place, and of the promise we kept together. The little girl from before came running up. Uncle, are you going back to your big office now? Sundar knelt, so he was at her level. Yes, but part of my heart will always stay here. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, the villagers gathered under the banyan tree for a small celebration. There was music, laughter, and food, shared by everyone. Sundar sat among them, not as a guest of honor, but as one of their own. As night fell, Kamala walked over. You know, she said, when you first came here, I thought you were just another man with big words. But you proved me wrong. You showed us that promises can be kept. Sundar smiled. And you showed me that change doesn't start with plans or speeches. It starts with trust. Before he left the village the next morning, Sundar recorded a short message for Modi and his mother. In it, he showed the river, the fields, and the smiling faces of the villagers. At the end of the video, the little girl stood beside him and waved. A few days later, in Delhi, Modi and Lakshmi watched the video together. When the little girl waved, Lakshmi chuckled softly. She reminds me of you when you were young, she said to Sundar over the call. Modi laughed again, shaking his head. Amma, I think this time your son has truly passed the test. Lakshmi looked into the camera. Tests never end, sir. They only change. The next one will come, and when it does, I hope he will still choose kindness. Modi nodded. If he has a mother like you, Oma, I have no doubt. There was a moment of comfortable silence. Then Lakshmi said something in Tamil, the same kind of playful remark she had made during their first meeting. Sundar translated it, and once again, Modi burst into genuine laughter. Lakshmi joined in, and soon Sundar found himself laughing, too. The sound carried through the room, warm and unguarded, just like the day it had all begun.